If your game isn't where you want it to be, then you might need to do something drastically different this season if you want to take your game to that next level. And that drastic thing is training 6 days per week for the entirety of your actual season. Now, if you want to learn how you can apply this to your own training schedule, watch and listen all the way through to the end, because I'm going to outline why it's important, which players should be doing this, and what your week should look like when it's implemented properly. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Joe Murphy. I co-founded League Fit Academy 9 years ago with the sole focus of educating young rugby league players about how to build their body, their skills and their mind. And we now work with thousands of players across all 7 continents right around the globe. Now, I know this won't be a popular take in certain circles, but there's a specific group of rugby league players that I would suggest need to keep working just as hard during the season when they're playing their games every week as they do in the off season when they have no other commitments. And that group of players are the ones that are not currently good enough to reach their goals. Maybe you've got hopes of playing in the Division 1 side, but you found yourself back in Div 2 again. Or maybe your goal was to trial for your local rep side, but you didn't even get invited. Or you did get invited, but you didn't end up making the final squad. Either way, the simple fact is you didn't achieve the goal that you set out to achieve. And yes, of course, there might be mitigating factors, but the most likely reason is that you simply weren't good enough. And chances are you were beat out by someone with more talent than you. And here's an uncomfortable truth. Some people are simply better than you. That's life. Now, I don't mean that they have more value as a human being, but what I do mean is that the roll of the dice in regards to genetics, which is 100% what determines your natural talent, those genetics mean that they may be bigger, faster, stronger than you. They may have superior hand-eye coordination, faster reaction times, and better footwork. To be blunt, they've got way more talent than you. And look, like I said, that's just life. Which is why if you have aspirations of being better, if your goal is to make the Division 1 team or make the starting side instead of coming off the bench, or even to be playing rep footy, you cannot approach your football the same way that the talented kids do. If you want to have a chance of reaching your goals, you must work as hard during the in-season as you do during the off-season. And that's the kicker. One thing you'll hear from a lot of strength and conditioning coaches is that during the season, you need to back right off on the volume of training that you're doing, and that your focus needs to be on simply maintaining the improvements gained during the off-season and recovering adequately from games. Focusing in more on the skill component and, really looking to be 100% for your game on the weekend. And technically, yes, all of those things are correct for some players. If, and I say if, you are already one of those players at an optimal level of physical readiness, skill and performances for your age and position. So let's say we look at NRL players. If they spend the off-season working on all these different areas of speed, strength, power and conditioning and get themselves, to a point, to a really sharp edge, so to speak, they then look to maintain as many of those qualities as they can during the season, and they base their training around having each player fresh for the game on the weekend. And that makes perfect sense because they're already at the top level of the game. Their objective is to perform at their maximum week in, week out over the course of a long and grueling season. Now, that's not you. Like I said, this isn't for everyone, but if you're one of those kids that's not as big, not as fast, not as skillful as your teammates, if you're one of those players who wasn't born with natural gifts and talents, then the simple fact is that hard work is your only advantage. That frequently used quote, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. It's the perfect summary of this fact. So you need to look at doing what the other players, the talented players, you need to look at what they're not doing. That's the only way that you're going to be able to beat them. And what most of them aren't doing is working ridiculously hard year round. They typically work hard during the off season. Once the season comes, they back off on their training and they focus more on their playing. And that's where the less gifted, the less talented player has to make their move. To give you an example, let's compare 2 players, Kennedy and Jackson. Now, both Kennedy and Jackson worked with us as a part of our off-season program. They both work really hard for the whole 6 months of an off-season. They're lifting weights 4 times a week, performing speed work a couple of times per week. They're getting their conditioning in 2 to 3 times a week, tracking their food and performing position-specific skill work almost every single day. Okay. Now, any player who does this consistently for 6 months will improve. And what we typically see is, a 6 out of 10 player will become a 7 out of 10 player. And that's exactly what happened with Kennedy and Jackson. They both got bigger, stronger, more skillful, faster over the course of an off-season. And here's where it gets interesting. Kennedy was a 6 out of 10 player and Jackson was a 7.5 out of 10 player at the start of the off-season. By the time the season came around, Kennedy had gone from a 6 to a 7 and Jackson had gone from a 7.5 to an 8.5 out of 10. But here's where they split and went down different paths. Jackson decided to just solely focus on his club's footy commitments, while Kennedy chose the hard work is my only advantage pathway, and he kept working his backside off both in the gym and on the field, performing about 90 to 95% of the volume of work that he was doing during the off-season itself. And he did that throughout the whole season. And here's what happened. Kennedy added another 6 kilos of lean tissue to his frame over the course of the season. Jackson, who came back to work with us again in the next off-season, he actually lost 3 kilos of lean tissue during the season, which is almost all of what he had gained during the previous off-season. Not to mention that his body fat went up significantly. Kennedy added another 20% to his strength in all of his major lifts. Jackson lost an average of 20% in his. Kennedy got faster in both his speed, 10-meter mark, and agility test. Jackson got slower. And when we tested their ball handling, passing, and offloading skills, the player who worked on it daily, Kennedy, blew Jackson completely out of the park. Now, these changes all happened despite Jackson having a superior level of natural ability and natural talent. So by the time we retested those numbers at the end of the in-season period, Kennedy had gone from a 7 to an 8 out of 10, whereas Jackson, who 12 months prior was a better player, regressed back down to where he was prior to performing the first off-season with us, and he was now a 7.5 out of 10. So they both started with us together and worked for 6 months, with both of them improving across all 12 metrics that we test. Then the season came along. Kennedy continued to work while Jackson did his own thing. At season's end, Jackson came back to us and we retested both of them. Jackson had improved significantly in the 6 months while he was with us, but then he lost almost all of it by not continuing to work during the in-season. Whereas Kennedy, who continued to work with us right through the season, not only did he not go backwards, he didn't even just maintain the gains that he made during the off-season, he actually got better. Now, did that mean that he wasn't 100% for every game during the year? Yeah, it did. He was probably playing his games while he was only 85 or 90% recovered from his training. But because he was focused on getting better over the long term, he understood that, that was the price to pay, and he was prepared to come in a little bit underdone. And at the end of that season, he had a trial to get into one of Sydney's top rugby league schools, and you know what? He made the cut. The reason given was that he was big, strong, fast and powerful, and the coach could see that he had an incredible work ethic, and that work ethic was what had driven him to this point. And the coach wanted someone with those physical qualities as well as that work ethic in his side. Now, he outworked the talent that he was born with. He put himself in front of a whole bunch of players with a lot more natural ability. Now, is this for everyone? Absolutely not. But for those players willing to focus on the long term, and instead of asking silly questions like, how can I get noticed by the selectors this weekend, which we get all the time, instead of that, focus on working hard during the season itself. This can be the key to bridging the talent gap between the gifted players and yourself. Now, what exactly does that look like? Well, in the normal schedule, things might look something like this. Game on Sunday, recovery on the Monday, so some light work. Tuesday, Wednesday, train hard with a club training session on a Tuesday night. Have a lighter day on Thursday, again, club training on a Thursday night. Maybe a captain's run on the Friday, before resting on the Saturday, the day before your game. That's sort of a typical in-season schedule that most people will follow. But that's not the kind of schedule that's going to bridge the gap between yourself and the more talented kids. Instead of that, for someone who's looking not to just to maintain, but to make gains during the season, here's an example of what your week could look like. So, you play on the Sunday. Monday, you work hard. If you didn't get too many niggles or knocks to your legs, then you're going to perform a leg session in the gym and you're going to go hard. You should also be getting your skill work in as well as your mobility work. Tuesday, work your upper body in the gym, get your skill work in, get your mobility work in, and typically you'll have a club session on a Tuesday night, which is usually when most sides do their hardest conditioning session. Now, if it's not hard enough, stay back and do an extra 15 to 20 minutes of extras to make sure you get enough work in. Wednesday, get a speed session in on the Wednesday, and perhaps a gym session focusing on ancillaries like shoulder stabilizers, core, and some arm work. Again, it goes without saying, mobility and skill work every single day. Thursday morning, hit your legs again. Get your mobility and get your skill work in. Then you've got club training on a Thursday night. Friday is upper day as well as some off-feet cardio. Don't forget your skills, don't forget your mobility. Saturday is just like Wednesday in that it's an ancillary session. Get it in early along with your skill work. No speed work on the Saturday. And don't forget to get your mobility work in. You can get that in later on the day. And obviously on Sunday you have your game. Now, is that a lot of work? Yes it is. Will you overtrain? It's possible. In fact, you might find that you need to build your tolerance up to this level over a period of time, and that's okay. You might find that every second or third week, you may need to drop a few of the resistance training sessions at the back end of that week to recover. Again, that's okay. And if you're going to do this, your nutrition needs to be on point, and you can't be staying up late on your phone. You need your sleep. Okay, but the point is to look at the season itself as a time to continue to get better, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to bridge the gap between yourself and the gifted kids. Now, we have used this method with a ton of players that have come through our academy and seen it take them from not being invited to a trial to actually making sides and even ending up being some of the most well-trained athletes within those squads. But you must have patience and you must be focused on what you can achieve in the long term. Because if you do this for 2 or 3 or 4 years, players with even the worst genetics can put themselves in the frame to play at a higher level. Trust me, because I'm Joe, and Joe knows.